Hello and welcome back. Thank you for joining us once again on another episode of An Audience Booked By. And this week, I always say it, but it's true, I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted to welcome, well, I don't know where to begin, really, literary novelist, crime writer, also the presenter of the Right channel on YouTube, and winner of the Betty Trask Award. But more important than that, my childhood friend, Nicola Monaghan. Welcome to the show, Nicola.
Thank you, Tracy. Nice to be here.
Oh, it's lovely, lovely to see you. It really is. It brings back so many memories, when we were working in the pub together and just really, I can't believe where your life has gone since then. You've lived such a fascinating life. It's incredible, really, because just going back to the beginning for you, you come from quite a large family, the Monaghans. I mean, they were infamous back in the day at our school. The Monaghans, everybody knew who the Monaghans were. So you really did take off in life and do some very exciting things. You started working, if I'm not wrong, you went off to do some investment banking after showing your skills in math.
Yes, that's right.
What happened to you? Where did you go?
Well, I mean, I always wanted to be a writer, and I remember stating that. I was in fourth year juniors. I remember saying it then, and I remember saying it to my maths teacher in first year seniors, and he suggested that I might want to write maths textbooks because he was basically claiming me for maths. And I did end up doing maths. I did a maths degree. I taught maths for a few years, and then, as you say, I went to work in the city, and I worked with traders, and I worked in software, did all sorts of different jobs in that area. And it was interesting. It was a lot of fun in many ways, but it was interesting because I realized after being there not very long, it was exactly what I didn't want from life, because it was right at the heart of, the kind of right at the heart of capitalism, right at the heart of a lot of things that I really, really railed against, and that I still really rail against to this day. So, it was really very much not me. And I think it's one of those things that you do when you're young, thinking, oh, this will be fun. And then you learn something about yourself by doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. But it did take you to some exciting places, starting with London. You went to the Big Smoke, as I don't think we even call it that anymore, but it certainly was back then. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I lived in London for about 10 years, in various parts of London, South London, Central London, all over the place, really. But I also moved abroad. I lived in Paris for nearly a year, but split over 2 years. I lived in Chicago similarly for nearly a year, but split over 2 years. So, I did have some really interesting experiences and a lot of fun. And learned a lot about life, really, from not just the travel, but things that happened while I was away, things that happened in London, and the people I met.
Which you've actually just literally said what I was about to ask you. You learned a lot about life. I mean, I think you were saying that when you were in Paris, because of the language barrier, and then it wasn't so easy to make friends, and so you took yourself off, and that's where you began writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd always intended to write. When I was working in the city, well, I worked in teaching first, and I really thought when I started to work as a teacher, oh, I'll have the holidays, I can write in the holidays. And that it wasn't true at all. I was so busy and so tired in the holidays that it never worked out that way. But then I went into the city, and all of a sudden I was working quite long hours, but I did actually have some energy for writing. So I had already started just on weekends and evenings, plodding away, doing little bits of writing. But then when I moved to Paris, and all of a sudden my social life went kaput for a while, because I just didn't know anyone, and it was so much harder to get to know people with the language barrier, that I started to actually do a fairly significant amount of writing, and do I suppose the slightly cliched thing of wandering from cafe to cafe with my notebook. And it was slightly before when people would carry laptops around, but that slightly cliched picture of the writer in Paris with the coffee and the notebook, and that was absolutely me for a while, which cliched as it might be, it was also an awful lot of fun.
Well, it might sound cliche, but it actually does sound very exotic, and it's like the ideal, isn't it? It's what people imagine. It's the room of one's own scenario. Virginia Woolf, the meeting up of all these Parisians and sitting around talking about culture. So you started writing about what sort of things were you influenced by, would you say?
Well, at that point in time, I wasn't really sure where to start. I was like, I know I want to be a writer. I don't have anything to write about. So I literally just started to describe things that had happened to me, literal scenes from my life, some of them more interesting than others. But, you know, I would think about things that had happened, important relationships that I'd had, and also big events that had happened. So, for example, the World Cup went on in France when I was there. There've been 1998, which ages me a bit, but that happened when I was there, and it was very exciting. Obviously, there were parties in the street. France won. You know, it was really quite a cool time rather to be in Paris. So, you know, those kind of things went into my notebook. Those kind of things just got described, went into my notebook, and stayed there, a lot of them. But what I did get from doing that is, because I was describing scenes that had happened to me, I started to get a sense of how you do that as a writer, how you create scenes. And some of those scenes sprung off into longer stuff and into actual stories, whereas some of them didn't. Some of them were, you know, became practice for what I was going to do as a writer. It was a bit of a mixture. But what I did find is, by writing those scenes and by writing anything, all of a sudden I had a ton of ideas. The ideas sprung off the writing.
And that, yeah, absolutely, because really the only way to write is to write, and also to read, you know, and it amazes me when people say, well, how do I, you know, well, it's very basic, you know, you read and you write and then you repeat. It's as simple and as hard as that.
It's as simple and as hard as that. It really is. Yeah, it's finding that spark and the place to start that is important. And for me, it was my life. It was things that had happened to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we do move on to talking about your books, which I have here, The Killing Jar, which I loved that, absolute classic. And then some of your later work here, crime writing work, which we will come to. You did go, I think it's important, I really do, I think that we need to mention this, that you did move with your job in banking to America, and you were in and around New York around about the time of 9/11.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was in Chicago on the actual day it happened, but I had been moving between the two offices. So we had an office in Chicago and we had an office in the 86th floor of the North Tower. And so, yeah, it was a very surreal morning to wake up, because I was on holiday. I woke up and turned the TV on and saw what had happened, and I was just really trying to work out if that was the building where our office was and how high up it was, and you know, you're doing all these awful add-ups in your head. And we were as a company, we were very, very lucky in that there was nobody from the company that I that I worked with, nobody died, which is unbelievable, really, quite miraculous. And it just so happened that the office manager was on holiday that week. Another guy who might have moved there had decided not to move there. If he'd have been there, other people would have been in the office, because people come in when the manager's there, don't they? And actually what happened was a lot of people were just kind of wandering in. It was a relaxed day. It was a relaxed week.
Incredible.
And if it hadn't been, and it was scary, because, you know, I mean, I wasn't as close to the tragedy as lots of other people I know. I certainly wasn't, you know, there on the day, but I had been in the building on the 11th of July. I had been in the building on the 11th of August. And it was, you know, so it did feel like it struck quite close to home, and it did make me think, right, enough of working in this environment, enough of doing things that I dislike and that I have a moral issue with. It's time to change my life and to do what I really want to do with it.
So do you really think that was the pivotal moment for you, where you know, you literally just decided to follow a different path?
It was certainly an accelerating factor. I don't know. I still don't know to this day whether I would have done the same things if that hadn't have happened. I was on track to, I was planning to, I was already thinking about those things. I was already, the writing had become more and more an important part of my life. And, that happened even more so when I was living in America. I had already started to look into applying for MAs and taking my life in a different direction. Whether I would have had enough of a trigger, because it's one of those things, isn't it? When you've got a very well-paid job, to leave that is very difficult. And so whether I would have had enough of a trigger without that happening, that I would have actually taken the steps that I did take, I'm not sure. Really being honest, I don't know. But it's certainly, as I said, it had a massive accelerating effect, definitely.
I don't think actually anyone, regardless of their life pattern to that point, could fail to be influenced in some way by what happened at Dreadwood. I mean, it's one of those historic moments, is where we all remember where we were at the time, and but for the grace of God,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you came. So you did in fact apply for an MA.
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I applied to a few places, and I got offered a place at Nottingham quite quickly, before anywhere else, really. So that started to feel a little bit like fate. I'd kind of vibed with the tutor and thought that they were really interesting. That was Graham Joyce who interviewed me, and I thought he was really interesting, and I really liked his work when I looked at that, and it just felt that the stars were aligning and it was time to come home.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, isn't it? When you see it, you see it, and yet quite often we can stumble around blindly, and then all of a sudden it's so apparent what the path forward should be. So it's just whether you take that step, and you certainly did, because you began writing this book as part of your MA, The Killing Jar, which is I won't say autobiographical, but maybe all our work is kind of in some respects autobiographical, because we have to have a starting point. Do you want to tell the viewers a little bit about how this came to be?
Yeah, of course. So, there are massive elements of autobiography in The Killing Jar, although one of the things my mum still jokes about now is the time she was sitting with her work colleagues and they had the radio on because I was going to be on, and John Holmes was kind of building up to it and said, can you imagine what it'd be like if your mum was a junkie and you were sent out selling drugs when you were 11? Well, we're going to talk to Nicola Monaghan soon, and she's going to tell us all about it.
Oh, I bet your mother loved that.
Oh, of course, yeah. She thought it was hilarious, to be fair. And the first thing John Holmes asked me when I went on the radio was how autobiographical it was. So it was very easy to quickly clear that up. But I'm actually doing a PhD at the moment, so I'm going back to my old work and looking at it again and examining it and thinking about it. And one of the things that I've said about The Killing Jar, and I remember I've said this at events along the way as well, it almost feels like an experimental thesis where I take somebody who is ultimately very similar to myself, ultimately really kind of based on myself, and I throw them in at the deep end in a really difficult situation, and I see what might have happened in that situation. So there is an element of autobiography definitely within the character. She's not quite the same as me. I think she's probably stronger and tougher, but there are definitely similarities. There are definitely things that I kind of recognize, and particularly looking back on it, there are things that I recognize as being really quite autobiographical. And then there are some moments, like I mentioned that I'd been writing those scenes. There are certain moments that are completely taken from life, like seeing a dead bird in the hedge, just little things like that you remember from your childhood, and they went into that book. So
and also I think you said to me about cars being stolen.
Yes.
That was just an everyday occurrence. There was a little particular story which I think
I would never forget this. It was when I was home for university, and it was in the kind of time period where the book's set. And I was home for university, and my dad's car got stolen. We lived just off the estate at this point on one of the main roads, and our cars were being stolen from outside our house all the time. And my dad's car got stolen. I think it was the third or fourth time. And my uncle came over to help him so that they could go out and look for the car, because they knew it was joyriders, and they knew ultimately the best thing really was if they could get the car before it got burnt out. So my uncle came over to help him, walked to the house to get him. They both walked out to go into my uncle's car to go and look for the car. And by the time they got out to the road again, his car had gone too. That was how. So this, there's quite a bit of. In fact, I think I started writing this with a joyriding scene, or with someone smashing a car window, or something like that. And it was very much just that moment of anarchy that I really associated with there being a lot of joyriding going on. Was one of the things that inspired this.
Because you do ground your work very much set in your hometown, and I know that you were fortunate enough to meet Alan Sillitoe, of course, Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, absolute another classic book. I mean, how did that come about that you would meet him?
Well, I met him and didn't meet him the first time. We were at a showing of Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, and he was there, and he was smoking outside. He had his pipe, very cool. I remember a journalist was hassling him a little bit about the Arctic Monkeys and their album cover, which was a quote from one of his books, and he was just nodding his head sagely. And I was nudging Chad and going, "Oh God, that's Alan Sillitoe! That's Alan Sillitoe!" I was ridiculously fangirling, and Chad was like, "Go and say hello," and I was like, "No, I can't. It's Alan Sillitoe. Don't you understand?" And then a little bit later, when I won the Betty Trask, I was there with Chad, and Alan Sillitoe was at the Authors Club event, and I was like doing exactly the same thing again, and Chad was like, "Enough, you were going to meet Alan Sillitoe today." And he got a copy of my book, and he took me over to Alan Sillitoe and introduced us and said, "This is my wife, she's written this book, it's brilliant, please read it." And this amazing thing happened. It makes me slightly tearful even now, but he handed the book back to me and asked me to sign it for him. So I suddenly found myself signing my book for Alan Sillitoe. It was amazing, a real kind of high. And he did write back to me because he asked me for my address as well, and he recognized the address because it was around the corner from where one of his friends lived growing up. So he recognized the address as well, which was amazing. And we had a little chat about these tenements that his friend had lived in, because my dad had lived there for a while as well. So, there's all this stuff going on. And then he wrote to me later and basically enjoyed the novel and said really lovely things about it in his letter. And we did spark up a bit of a correspondence for a while, and until not really very long before he died. Yeah.
Oh, that's absolutely incredible. What a fantastic moment, and a memory that you'll have forever. Alan Sillitoe, for goodness sake, because obviously he based his work in and around Nottingham. I mean, that's almost like, makes me think of Lawrence territory. It's myth, legend, and all the rest of it. And here you are setting your own work in very much in Nottingham, because you finished the book after you'd finished your MA. And then you sent it off to agents, obviously, and I did a really unwise thing. I sent it off before I'd finished it. Yeah. So I'd only written about 10,000 words, and I was sending it out. Unfortunately, I came up against an agent who liked to work with people who were early on in their careers, new writers who were writing their first novel, and he enjoyed the editorial process of working someone through their first novel. So he helped me with my first novel, and he gave me lots of guidance that I wouldn't have had if he hadn't have taken me on at the point that he took me on. So that was really helpful. But yeah, that's right, I finished it. It probably in the 6 months or so after I finished my MA, I finished the book. And it got picked up, didn't it, by Chatto Publishing? It did. So the real, one of the powerhouses, really, of publishing. So how did that go? How did that pan out for you? Well, I mean, it went with The Killing Jar. It went really well, and for a literary novel, it sold a surprising number of copies, and they were very pleased with it. Unfortunately, when Starfishing, my second novel, came out, and I do have a soft spot for Starfishing. It represents a certain time in my life that was, interesting and difficult and all sorts of things. And it has a bit of autobiography in it. But I don't think it was quite as good a book, if I'm being really brutally honest with myself, as The Killing Jar. And it also came out at a really difficult time. It came out
bang in the middle of the credit crunch, it kind of it spoke to what was happening. I mean, it talked about the causes of the credit crunch, really, and that was not deliberate. I just happened to be documenting something that was really actually absolutely related to what was going on. So that was kind of accidental, but at the same time, it did, but it wasn't. All sorts of things happened. My publicist for The Killing Jar was the amazing Ruth Ware, who now writes herself, who probably quite a few people watching this will know, and she was fantastic, so good, and did such a good job for The Killing Jar. Unfortunately, she was on maternity leave when Starfishing came out, and so these little logistical things happen that affect the performance of a book, and Starfishing didn't do quite so well, unfortunately. But I loved working with Chatto. They were such a lovely bunch of people, such an amazing publisher, and they do such a lovely job with the books and Vintage as well. You know, that it was a really fantastic part of my life. Yeah.
So what did you do? What happened after Starfishing then? Did you take a different approach, or?
I didn't to start with. I did continue to write literary novels for a while. I wrote another 1.5 that were not working. I wrote one that wasn't working, and then I started another one that wasn't working. And then I was talking to my agent, and he'd been trying to encourage me for quite a long time to go a bit more commercial. You know, he kept saying, do you want to make a living from your writing, and things like that. And I thought, well, yeah, I do really. And so I started to write stuff that was, or to try to write stuff that was more commercial. And that took a while, because I would start writing something and send it to him, and he'd be like, no, it's still a bit literary, you're going to have to try again. And so we kept getting, and eventually we got there with a book that was eventually called The Haunted, which is a horror story inspired by my honeymoon. Which doesn't really reflect on the honeymoon or my marriage, I have to say. It's a little bit like the Killing Jar, in that I took that as a springing off point for the horror story.
Did you use a different pen name, or did you stick to Nicola Monaghan?
No, I wrote those books as Nikki Valentine, which is, okay. You know, I'm called Nikki generally by my friends, and Valentine is my actual real surname after getting married, which is obviously also quite relevant to the story. So that came out 2010, I think it was, with Sphere, who are J.K. Rowling, Robert Galbraith's publisher. So again, a really big publisher. Yeah,
absolutely. So it turned into a bit of something happened, didn't it, that partway through your journey there, or did you complete a trio for them?
I completed a 2-book deal. I had a 2-book deal with them, and again, it was a case of the first book doing quite well and the second book really not gaining the momentum that they would have wanted. So in the end, that you know, I could have written a 3rd book for them, and I started to think about ideas, and I sent a couple of things, and we were toing and froing. But there was a book that I was writing that I'd sent to my agent, and he just didn't get it. And these things happen. Sometimes you vibe with an idea, or you don't. And he didn't get it. He kind of passed me on to another agent, saying, I'm not sure that I'm the right person to work with you on this book. Passed me on to another agent within the agency. She worked with me on it for a while. But then it was kind of, she was looking at a publisher, but they were like, it's not quite for us. We really love this, but it's not quite for us. And then she moved on as well. She moved on to a publisher from the agency, and then ultimately I'd been sort of, because I was beginning to think, am I going mad? Is this book not right? Is this book not good? And so I had an agent friend that I'd been in touch with for many years, and you know, I considered a friend. So I sent it off to him. I said, am I going mad? Is this book any good? And he loved it. He absolutely loved the book. And he said, you know, I'll represent you if you want. So I ended up leaving one agency to go to this other agency. Yeah. And that all kind of went a little bit wrong as well, because we worked on the book until it got to the point where he was happy to submit it. And then he started to send it out. But unfortunately, it had been on submission. There'd been a few rejections, as is the norm. And then all of a sudden, absolute radio silence from my agent. I didn't hear from him, and I didn't hear from him again until I didn't hear from him again before I saw in the bookseller that he'd sold his agency and left the country. So it was all very difficult. It wasn't his fault ultimately. He had been quite ill in a number of ways, and I'm in touch with him again now, and I'm friends, and I still consider him a friend. But it is, you know, it is again those logistical things that happen in publishing. Someone goes on maternity leave, someone gets ill, these things that kind of then have a real kind of impact on your career, and in this case a really kind of crushing impact on my career, because I had this book out in the world and didn't even know what was happening with it, and I can only assume it was rejected, because otherwise publishers would have found a way to get in touch if they were really keen to publish it, I'm sure. So yeah, in the end, as it happened at that time, I went to a workshop which was really for my teaching, because I teach students about self-publishing. It's one of the modules I do. It's not specific self-publishing, but at the time I was teaching them this module, and they had to self-publish a book, so I thought I'd better learn about this. So I went to a workshop with Joanna Penn, and I came away from that utterly inspired. I was going to be an authorpreneur. I was going to publish my own work, and so I did. And I published some short story collections, and then I published this book, although I published it as a series of 3 novellas, and yeah, and that was fun and a good experience.
What a fun, and I think just for the sake of those tuning in who are not aware of who Joanna Penn is, if you look her up on the Creative Pen, she is literally the bee's knees when it comes to all things publishing, marketing, writing. She has got it covered. So really do look her up, because she is amazing. So yeah, I mean, you published your own work, so these books exist out there in one form or another, which is brilliant. So you've gone from the big publishing house. I mean, I've had this conversation with so many authors now. The big publishing house, the agent, the dream, you know, to things not quite going so well, to kind of bringing it back home, really, and doing it for yourself. But what an experience, what a journey to go on to start with.
It was.
And it kind of has come full circle for you, because you did another MA, didn't you?
I did. Yeah.
You're just MA and PhD mad. But go
I am. I do love university. I did an MA in crime fiction at UEA. I just saw this course appear, and it was one of those things where you see something and you think, that's for me. That has happened for me. I'm supposed to do that. And I felt really strongly that I was supposed to do that course. And so yeah, I did. I enrolled and I did it, and it was another transformative experience. My first MA was, this MA was. I think they kind of, I don't know if you remember those platform games that you used to play when you were younger, like on the Nintendo, and you would get onto a platform and it would suddenly go whoosh and take you much faster. That's how I feel about my MAs. My writing's plodding along, and then I get on an MA and it goes whoosh, and it just accelerates what's going on. And so that's what happened. And I knew I wanted to write crime. My proposal on my first MA for my dissertation was, I knew myself what writer I was then. It just took me a while to get back round to it. So I proposed The Killing Jar as a literary crime novel, and it is, and it sat on both shelves when it went into the bookshops. And actually that's my territory. That's exactly where I need to be, and that's exactly what I should be writing. As I say, I've known that for 15 years.
It's strange, isn't it? You know, the difference between knowing it innately within yourself and the time it takes for that to manifest into something that you can work with. Oh, I know that journey too well. But
a time in a lot of books where I was trying different things before I just came right back to my first MA dissertation proposal, which was that I'm a literary crime author. And you know, that it was an interesting honing in process, and obviously I learned a lot along the way, but it is right that my assessment of myself back then was right.
Gut instinct. You should always listen to it, and also go with it. So this was, I think, the product of that MA, wasn't it? Dead Flowers, again set in Nottingham, but this time we have Dr. Sean Love, who is your protagonist, your main character. Tell me a little bit about this book.
So This book was kind of inspired by this little enclave in the centre of Nottingham that I've always been quite fascinated with. So quite close to the railway station, near a traffic island, if you turn off the road to the right, you come to a place called Cliff Road, and it's narrow marsh historically, which was one of the biggest slums in Europe. It was a really kind of like a tough place to live, but I write about it as Cliff Road, and I write about it in the 1960s and 70s, and then bring it back up to date. And I have these two timelines, this character that finds bones in the cellar and has to find out who they are and that kind of thing, and she's a DNA analyst, and all sorts of different threads of my different themes and types of writing all came together in this book. Really, it was such a fun one to write. But I do find that little area of Nottingham quite inspiring. It's one of those places where you walk through and you can almost feel the history around you. It's just so kind of full of the atmosphere of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really enjoyed this, and I think you're actually working on a well, actually, before we get to that, the publishing route for this was more of an independent route, wasn't it?
It was. It's a smaller publisher, a press called Verve. When I first signed up with them, it was an ebook only deal, and I didn't know whether there would be a print book. But obviously, there is a print book now, and there are other things in the offing which I'll officially announce soon. But yeah, that book is been published through a smaller publisher, which was a different experience again, and I've really enjoyed, and feels like a really nice home for my fiction. So very excited to be with Verve.
So there is a second book in the offing, I think, for
I'm working on that at the moment.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the same character, Dr. Sean Love, the DNA analyst. This time she's looking into the disappearance of a little girl. In fact, an adult woman has walked into her office, and this little girl, Courtney Johnson, disappeared many years before, and this girl thinks she might be Courtney. She's seen a reconstruction on the TV, a picture of what she might look like now, and it looks like her. So she's like, I think I'm Courtney. So that's what Sean investigates in this one, which and it's taken me all sorts of places in the country, sort of psychically, not reality at the moment because of the way things have been, but down to the south coast, down to Brighton, down to a little sort of town there that I know near Hastings called Bexhill-on-Sea, and all of these kind of shingly seaside places that I've got really warm memories of. And
of course, the best thing about the internet, when it's not disappearing on you, is that you can check out these places online, and it saves you a whole heap of traveling. Although I think for writers, part of the fun is being able to travel to those places in
definitely.
Absolutely. But at least we can do it virtually. I hope we don't have to do all life virtually, if I'm honest, but it has its moments, So just to come back to where this all began in terms of your writing, because of course now you're teaching creative writing at the Montford University. So yeah, you're working at the Montford as a creative writer, lecturer, and I bet they're really fortunate to have you there. But you're also working now, I think, you're bringing it. I love this, that in the whole arc of the story that is not Nicola Monaghan, the arc, we're coming home again, because you're coming back to the literary novel, beginning with some of the scenes that you were writing in Paris.
That's right. Yeah, no, I'm doing a PhD, and it's partly part of that process that I went back to look at some really old writing, and I actually got the writing from Paris, and I compiled it and put it together in this big thick folder. It was all about one character, and a lot of it was very autobiographical, like I said, and so I started to look at that and think, is there a novel here? I'd tried to make it into a novel years ago and it hadn't worked. I'd come back to it several times and looked at it again and it still hadn't worked. So I looked at it another time, and suddenly it became a novel. It is becoming a novel. And it's a novel about becoming a writer, and it's a novel about suddenly sitting down in these cafes in Paris, finding the headspace and the time to do some writing, on the back of being a bit lonely, which is an odd thing because you think you don't want to be lonely, but actually for me it was a really good thing. Being a bit lonely, being a bit bored, sparked everything off. And so yeah, I've gone back to this stuff. It's a bit like having a conversation with an old friend, looking at some of this old writing, and very nostalgic. But as I said, what's coming from this is a book that is all about creativity, how it happens, and how I became a writer, and also a bit about how I experiment with genre as a writer and how I try different genres and learn particular things from trying those genres. So yeah, that's Flyboats, and that's another novel that I'm working on at the moment.
And do you know which where you will take this? Do you think you will try again for an agent, the traditional route, or do you feel more comfortable now in the self-publishing or independent publishing?
I'm not quite sure at the moment. I think I might try and find an agent to guide me, because they might have a strong idea about where this book belongs. I mean, I have, you know, I have a bit of a way to go with it before it'll be ready for that process. But, you know, I think I do feel like I am at the point again where I could do with a bit of a guiding hand, someone to say, so this is your career and this is where this is what we should be thinking about now. So yeah, I think I probably will be looking for an agent quite soon to do that kind of thing.
Well, I wish you all the luck. I don't think you need it. I think you know exactly what you're doing. You're a very together person, and it's, you know, I think, like we were saying earlier, you have an instinct for something. You should trust that instinct, have faith in it, and do the work and produce the work and take it forward, which is exactly what you've been doing. So just to let the viewers know again, you know, Nicola has a fantastic channel on YouTube called The Write Channel. The link will be in the bio below, but do check that out and subscribe, because some great tips there for writers.
Thank you.
You know, there's such a wealth of knowledge out there on the internet, but there's certain people who just seem to get it together, and I think Nicola is definitely one of those. And, you know, good luck with the teaching career. You seem to have a nice balance there with writing. And thank you so much for joining us here on An Audience Booked By. Thank you
for inviting me, Tracy.
Yeah,
it's been a real pleasure.
You're very welcome. Now, usually at this stage, I would announce who the next guest is, but I think we're going to take a little bit of a mid-season break, because there might be a little bit of a change of direction there with moving away slightly from writers and authors into other creatives. So keep your eyes peeled for that. As always, I'll be putting it out on Twitter and Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe if you feel the urge, or just check us out for later on. But for now, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Take care.